You're listening to the Turn Autism Around podcast, episode number 225. This is a classic rebroadcast on a show we did a couple of years ago on hyperlexia, which is an intense interest in letters and numbers and words and reading before you can speak, possibly. It is often an early sign of autism. It's a confusing sign because I know back when Lucas started showing signs of hyperlexia, before I thought about autism, or when I wanted it to be hyperlexia instead of autism, it was confusing to me. So this episode hopefully clears it up. There's a lot in here a lot of stories and a lot of advice on what you should do to bring those strengths forward without affecting or making language worse. We really need to capitalize on the child's strengths to bring up the weaknesses. And today we're talking all about that. So glad you're listening to this episode all about hyperlexia, which is really quite common in children with autism. And it is also an early sign or red flag for autism to be overly interested and sometimes obsessed with letters. But despite being able to read well, children with hyperlexia will oftentimes show signs of a developmental disorder such as autism. And because they are focused on letters and reading, and at the same time, if they are also unable to speak or communicate like other kids of their age, this is often a red flag. Now, an interest in letters and reading early can also be a sign of giftedness, but that's when your language is pretty much intact, and then you're also heavily interested in letters and reading early. Kids with early signs of hyperlexia and autism also might exhibit behavioral problems, insistence on sameness, wanting to line up letters, wanting you to repeat words or letters, often. And the other big thing about hyperlexia when it is an early sign of autism is that the child has usually lower understanding of language, what we call receptive language. And I've done a video blog on receptive language, and you might want to check that out, because if they don't understand, for instance, when they're 2, how to touch their head or their belly without you showing them, that would mean that their receptive language or their understanding of language is probably below expected. So if you have a child who is, say, 2, who is not requesting things they want, who is not saying mommy and daddy, who's not potentially pointing at that point. Pointing is a big deal. I've done a video blog on that. But then you also state that despite these delays, your child has an interest in letters. This is often hyperlexia and also a developmental disorder, and probably a sign of autism. So let me tell you a few stories, just to kind of give it some context. I have told these stories on different podcasts. I have done a video blog on autism and hyperlexia. And so some of these stories you might sound familiar from here and there, but I was so confused when my son Lucas, who's now 25 years of age, when he started showing hyperlexia signs. I had no idea what it was. The internet was just coming to be a thing. So for a while, for probably a year, I was just thinking this was just a sign of intelligence and it was a cute little thing. So Lucas, we would go into Friendly's restaurant and they would have the letters FRIENDLY apostrophe S, like welcome to Friendly's. And Lucas would go up to the Friendly sign and he would say F. And he might not know R or not say R, but he would get to the I, he'd say I. And then he'd point to the E, and instead of saying E, he would say egg, which we had a puzzle that the E and underneath it was egg. So I could kind of see where he was getting the egg from. And again, I was just confused, thinking this is a good sign. And I'm not here to say that this is a bad sign. It's not a bad sign. It's just hyperlexia. And it is, in many cases, a sign of autism. And we need to know how much to push letters and how much to pull back. And we're going to talk about all that today. But Lucas always had like a strong desire to identify letters. He liked logos. If we'd pass a Toys R Us, he'd get excited. So he was paying attention to the stimuli in our environment that had letters. He was also good at puzzles. He liked puzzles, and he had this puzzle association for the E for egg, for instance. Okay. That was Lucas. He never did read before he could talk. He kind of always had some words, and he was never officially diagnosed with hyperlexia. It's kind of, it is a separate diagnosis in some cases, but it's really just a sign of either a developmental disorder like autism, could be ADHD, or it could be a sign of giftedness with or without a developmental disorder. So let me tell you about another child I worked with. He was a client of mine. I'll call him Nick. And he was in 6th grade when I made my first visit to the school. He was had very poor language. Still, if you're familiar with the VB map, he was still within level 2 and 3 of the VB map, even though he was in 6th grade. So that is really impaired. So a 6th grader, I don't know how old a 6th grader should be, but the VB map being at level 2 and 3 is that of a 3 and 4 year old child. So his language was very, very far behind. So I went in not knowing much about Nick, and he was in learning support reading. And I went to the door to watch him, and he was reading a passage aloud. It just so happened to be September 11th, 2005, when my first visit to Nick took place. And so he was reading a passage about 9/11, about the planes crashing into the towers. And he was reading, and he would be like, it was a bright sunny day, September 11th, 2001. And so he was reading fluently. But then it was very sad and very alarming, because when he got to the part about a plane crashing into Tower 1, he read it fluently, and then he started making like crash noises, like poof, poof, poof. And I was just standing there kind of in shock that a child could read this well and have so little comprehension. And you can see kind of the mismatch between the ability to read and comprehend. Nick also had memorized math facts. He could tell you what's 9 times 3. He could tell you what's 35 divided by 5. He could rotely answer those questions. But again, his comprehension was so bad that if you said you were making something and you had 3 eggs and you needed 4 eggs, how many more eggs would you need? He would have no idea. He could tell time to the minute, but then if you said, okay, we're going to go there in 5 minutes or we're going to leave in 30 minutes, he would have no idea what that meant. So that's where we really have to focus, especially with older kids. So I told you about Lucas. I told you about Nick, who's an older child. And recently, I want to tell you one more story before we get into the nitty gritty here. I recently talked to a mom who has a son, who 2-year-old, who is showing early signs of autism. And when I spoke with her, she was focused on how quote unquote smart he is because he knows all his letters and he can count to 10, but he's having behavioral outbursts. He won't tolerate going to the doctors and getting his ears checked. He won't tolerate, things like that. He also has not said mommy and daddy in a long time. He's not saying like other words, and he's hyper focused on letters. And, I think this is a common thing that happens is parents whose kids do say these things, like with my case with Lucas and with this little boy, parents get falsely reassured that if they're on the spectrum, this means that they're quote unquote high functioning, or this means that they definitely don't have intellectual disability. And I've known many kids, including the child I called Nick, and including my son Lucas, and including the boy I talked about in my video blog on hyperlexia and autism. These 3 boys, men, now do have autism plus an intellectual disability. So I did a video blog on intellectual disability, and I know that's a really hard thing to swallow for many people, is that they don't, if you're going to have a child with autism, you want to help them get to their highest potential, and having another diagnosis of intellectual disability with IQ under 70 is kind of alarming. But I'm here to tell you that, with the mom of the little 2-year-old, we can't rule out or rule in intellectual disability. And just because he knows all his letters does not mean he's quote unquote high functioning. I did do one of my first podcast episodes and a video blog on high functioning versus low functioning. So you can check out all of these things. When I say I've done something, you can check out the show notes. They'll be there, marybarbera.com/141 for this episode show notes. You can also, if you're out running errands, or you're exercising and you're listening to this and you're like, I don't understand, where I'm going to find this stuff. You can always search Mary Autism plus whatever topic. So if you want to find the hyperlexia blog, you could do Mary Autism plus hyperlexia. If you want to find the intellectual disability blog, I wrote Mary Autism Intellectual Disability. So everything is pretty searchable, and I know this is a lot of information, so I'm going to just try to stick to the topic at hand, but I want to point you towards different resources. And one final question from that mom that I was talking to with the little boy who knew his letters is does this mean he'll be okay at 8 or 18? And while I told her, basically, I wrote a video blog, can you predict how a 2-year-old will do at age 8 or 18? And in my more than 2 decades in the autism world, I can tell you, you cannot predict how a 2-year-old would do. So we need to treat any symptoms, any speech delays, any behavioral disorders, any signs of delays in any area, any intolerance to getting your ears checked, any intolerance to getting haircuts. We need to treat all this these delays and differences as much as possible so that each child can reach his or her fullest potential, whether or not they're on the spectrum and whether or not wherever they are on the spectrum or turn out to be. So the big things here are this really high interest in anything, but in letters and numbers and hyperlexia. This could indicate that it is more likely autism. Now, I can't diagnose autism, and really very few professionals can diagnose autism, such as a developmental pediatrician, neurologist, psychiatrist, psychologist, and some specially trained pediatricians. And, I'm going to tell you that if your child does have hyperlexia plus signs of autism, that, you have to make the decision whether or not you want to pursue this and get a diagnosis. And the waiting lists are usually very long to even get in line for an evaluation. So it probably doesn't hurt to get in some lines for an evaluation while you try to turn things around. And we can talk about how you can try to turn things around in terms of hyperlexia and any kind of delays a little bit later. So how common is hyperlexia in children? According to WebMD, 84% of children with hyperlexia also have autism spectrum disorder. So 84% of those that present with early hyperlexia do have autism. And about 6 to 14% of children with autism have hyperlexia. So it's not, super common, but if you have like Lucas saying E and egg, and I remember finding hyperlexia before I really was out of denial about autism, and I found the Hyperlexia Association. I don't know if they're still going strong or not, but I happened to find a woman in my local area, and she was nice enough to let me come over to her house, and I didn't have Lucas with me at the time. We'll call her Nancy. And I went over to Nancy's house, and her son wasn't home. He had hyperlexia and autism, and I didn't have Lucas with me. So at that point, I was thinking of speech delay and hyperlexia. And she told me that, there was really good treatment for kids with autism, and I should look into autism even if I thought that Lucas just had speech delays. And when I called the Hyperlexia Association or a professional, she's like, yeah, well, it sounds like he needs a diagnosis of autism. And I'm like, I don't want him to have autism. I want him to have hyperlexia. And she's like, well, unfortunately, if he has developmental delays, plus this interest in letters, that makes it more likely that he has autism, not less likely. And you probably, if you've been listening to me for a while, you've probably heard me and others talk about savant skills. And this can be where you have not only early reading and early obsession with letters and numbers, but you actually have this very unique ability, which I don't understand it. I don't know that many people understand it, but it's when kids say, you give your birth date and your year, and a child or an adult with a savant skill can say, in my case, you were born on a Tuesday. And I've been told that by like 3 different autistic individuals have told me that my birth date was on a Tuesday. And this is a savant skill. If those of you who watched the movie Rain Man way back when, some people with autism memorize sports facts, want to be sportscasters, like sometimes these savant skills can work out to be like a strong hobby or even a work skill. But in most cases, the stronger the savant skill, it just, especially if the other delays are not caught up in the speech and the receptive language and the tolerance to haircuts and doctor visits, if that's not all caught up, and you have somebody that's memorizing my birthday in some kind of way with calendars, it just becomes less and less functional. So knowing letters or numbers at 2 doesn't make a child high functioning. It doesn't mean that he won't go on to need a diagnosis or get a diagnosis of intellectual disability. And it doesn't mean that he won't need lifetime care. It doesn't mean that he will either. But we just have to work. I love this quote from the book, Let Me Hear Your Voice. And I think it's a quote from other things too, but I'm not sure who the original source was. But I read somewhere once that you have to work like it all depends on you and pray like it all depends on God. And one of the things we can do is actually pull back on any focus on numbers, letters, colors, and shapes with very young children who are not talking functionally and age appropriately. So if a child isn't functionally talking, we don't want to hyper focus on numbers and letters. We need functional words taught like mommy, daddy, juice. Knowing letters with a 2-year-old can and does make language sound weird. It can really make the child more likely to get a diagnosis of autism versus less. But you can use it to your advantage as well. You just have to be really careful, because the more you let the child go on Google Earth and memorize different things, or the more you give child free access to calendars where they can kind of get obsessed with different things, the more likely that time is going to be taken away from teaching them very, very functional skills. But you can use this early interest and in letters and numbers by doing a few things. So I had a child that I talk about in my Turn Autism Around book who ate crackers, gluten-free crackers, and drank almond milk with a bottle at the age of 2. That's all he ate and drank, morning, noon, and night. And so we needed to identify strong reinforcers for bites of food. And this little boy really loved letters. So we had a 26 letter puzzle, and we would do, he needed like feeding program. He needed a set program. And I am pretty much a feeding expert at this point as well. And even back then when I was working with this little boy, I was as well. And we would use each letter as a reinforcement. He just wanted to see the letter. He wanted to put the letter in the puzzle piece. And we, turned around his whole eating, his ability to eat real foods and drink real things besides almond milk out of a bottle. We used this letter puzzle. You can also use letters and letter names like A, B, C, to improve articulation. One of the techniques that I talk about everywhere throughout my book, my online courses, everywhere, is we want to break language down into 1-syllable utterances, 2-syllable utterances. We're not even talking words. We're talking 1-syllable, 2-syllable words early on. And the good thing about the English alphabet is they are all 1-syllable, and they're all can be used to make up words. So C is the letter C, but it's also C, like with your eyes, see. Me, E, if they can say E and they can say M, then they can probably say me, if you can get them to say M, me, and then you can push that together to be me. So a lot of things we can do, and you can do the same kind of thing with numbers, which are also 1 or 2 syllable. One is obviously one syllable. 7 is 2 syllables. But kids that are highly motivated to get the piece that you're of the puzzle. So if a child is not hyper-focused on letters and numbers, I probably wouldn't present letters and numbers as your first puzzles. But if your child is really obsessed or interested in letters and numbers, I might use those, not all the time. We need them also to do puzzles that are animals: cow, pig, horse. We also need him to do the shoebox program, which is another early learner material that is really helpful. And when you do the shoebox program, we want words, nouns, that are highly preferred things and people. And so if the child has a cat, and cat is a pretty functional word and he likes cats, you have a picture of a cat, but if it has CAT on the bottom, we want to cut that off or tape it up, because we do not want the child hyper focusing on, he sees a cat, he knows how to spell it, he does spell it. Just think about how that may be shaped up to be weird language. So no matter what the child's age too, we also want to focus on receptive language and comprehension. So when we talk about reading comprehension eventually in 3rd grade, 4th grade, 5th grade, we need to go way into language comprehension. If you don't understand what it means to say, I have a pet cat named Sam, reading that, I have a pet cat named Sam, may sound interesting, but when you don't understand what a pet is, you don't understand, the cat ran down the street, but you don't understand what a street is. You can't identify if somebody points to a street or shows you a picture of a street and you don't understand that. And you might say, well, that doesn't really matter. Well, yeah, it does, because we're constantly giving children directions to stay out of the street, stop at the corner, and if children don't understand these kinds of words, then we're in trouble. Okay, so we talked about how to use these interest in letters as a reinforcement and to focus on comprehension. You can also focus on using, especially for older kids, like this child, Nick. I was his consultant, his behavior analyst from 6th grade all the way through age 21. And we used a lot because he could understand text really well. And he needed a lot of help and a lot of prompting, but he worked, for instance, at a bakery and a grocery store. And so he could independently do things, but he would just need reminders. But I would probably need reminders if I were going into a grocery store bakery for the 1st or 5th time. I would need reminders how many cookies go across and down. And, it's kind of complex because he had different jobs within the bakery. And so we would actually write down in order, get blueberry muffins, get large pan, 4 across, 6 down, and then put it in the oven. I don't think he actually did that direction, but just think of a task list for yourself. And that did really work in terms of requiring less and less prompting from an actual adult. An adult needed to be there, but the more we can use textual prompts, picture prompts, the more independent the child or adult can be. So in summary, young children with early signs of hyperlexia, which is the ability to recognize letters and read before they can speak, usually also have signs of a developmental disorder, especially autism. So in general, I would not focus on teaching or reinforcing or hyper talking about pre-academics to toddlers and preschoolers in general. This includes letters, numbers, colors, shapes, reading. If they are already reading, make sure you focus on comprehension. So they might be able to read at a second grade level and they're only 4. Let's focus on reading, pre-reading for 4-year-olds or things like that, and have them be able to answer questions and teach them the things that they're going to need in order to comprehend even at the very preschool level. The key is here to learn what to teach in what order, and that you can learn through reading my new book, Turn Autism Around, which I think really does lay out nicely what to teach in what order, especially for young kids. I do talk about hyperlexia in the first couple of chapters. We can use hyperlexia to improve articulation, to improve other things like eating. And for older kids who can read but not understand, we should be working on comprehension and might be able to use textual prompts like I did with Nick as well. So what are your next steps to helping your child or clients with hyperlexia and autism? You can check out the video blog I did a while back called Hyperlexia and Autism. You can read the Turn Autism Around book, and you can consider joining one of my 2 online courses. One is the toddler preschooler course, and the other course is called the Verbal Behavior Bundle. You can learn about either of these courses by attending a free online workshop at marybarbera.com/workshop. I hope you enjoyed the solo show on hyperlexia, and I'll be back right here next week. If you're a parent or professional and have benefited from the information you learned from me on this podcast, or from my Turn Autism Around book, or from my online courses, I would love to hear about your success. Please go to marybarbera.com/success and fill out a very short survey. On the survey, you can upload your book or podcast review, or you can share a picture or video and tell me how your life has been impacted. I will personally review everything submitted, and I would love to hear from you. I'm on a mission to turn autism around for millions of children around the world so that each child can be as safe, as independent, and as happy as possible. By writing a Turn Autism Around Amazon or podcast review, and by sharing your story with me, you'll be able to help others find out about the Turn Autism Around resources so they can start turning things around too. I can't wait to hear all about your success at marybarbera.com/success. Thanks so much.